Planet Mission Part 1 by David Claiborne, as read by the author. New chapters every Monday. The full novel is available on Amazon.com and other online retailers. Links in the description. Chapter 20. Chunking Twigs. Waters lay in the shelter, perturbed but unmotivated to do anything about it. The breeze had died down with the heat of the day, and the open door of the PTFE shelter he now shared with Tommy, Bo, and Junebug listed gently. Weeks had passed since the storm destroyed their camp. Summer on Polus IV was at its height. Bo emerged from his small partition in the shelter. Despite the summer heat and sun, he was pale. His face had grown lined and dusky, his shoulders slumped. He had not trimmed his hair or shaved. The environmental suit he wore perpetually was now starting to show wear. "You don't look good," Waters said. "I know, Alex, I know," Bo said. "Where are you going?" Waters asked as Bo moved toward the entrance. "There's nothing so important that it needs to be done today. Why don't you take a day off, get some rest, stay at camp with us?" "I think you're right," Bo said. "Maybe I'll go pay our friend a visit." "Is that where you've been spending all your time, sitting with that animal?" Waters asked. "No, not all my time, but it helps me think. Somehow it helps me think," Bo said, slipping out the door. Watching Bo leave, at last Waters resolved to do something. He needed to speak to the mayor. He was bored, they were bored as a mission team. They had made no more progress in the weeks since the storm than they had in the weeks leading up to it. As much as the mission's progress weighed on him, it was clearly a burden to the team as well. He was determined to learn what was so special about the city that none of them could enter. What was so great about their way of life that they had nothing to learn from the missionaries? At least that would be something to do. At least it might help. At worst, nothing would change. Waters pulled on his boots and stomped up the hill toward the city. For no reason other than desire for something different, he turned aside from the path and followed the river. He wound his way over the grass towards the water, careful not to slip and injure himself or damage his suit. The sound of the cascades babbled pleasantly in his ears and sent a cooling mist into the air that worked wonderfully against the heat of the afternoon. Then he saw someone across the river. No, not just someone. A lady walked down the opposite bank. Her long dark hair hung in great waves upon her shoulders. She wore a flowing light blue dress. Although it was midday, her gown glowed like the light of the city itself, or was it she herself who gave off the light? A Polus bear accompanied her, but she was not riding. It approached, nuzzling her. She rewarded it by taking its cheeks in her hands and blowing across its nose. The Polus bear tossed its head with delight. A pair of hounds walked at her heels. They gamboled about, running away from her into the bushes, rocks, and trees, sending squirrels and other small creatures scattering up tree trunks and into rocks and crevices, chittering and scolding as they fled before the hounds bounded back to the lady for affirmatory head pats and ear scritches, re-energized for the next chase. Waters stopped to watch the lady. He could not help but do so. As she drew near the opposite bank, she took notice of him and waved. He looked to his side and behind before realizing that she was waving at him. He wondered why such a lady would take notice of him when he looked again and recognized her. The lady was Molly, or rather, Molly was the lady. She walked a few meters back up the cascade to where the rocks formed a serviceable path and crossed. She stepped lightly over the stone path to the other side, the hounds bounding after her, eagerly following. Their paws and claws struggled to grip the rocks, dipping their hindquarters in the cool water when they slipped, but that only strengthened their enthusiasm. The Polus bear forded the pool above the rock path with ease, dipping its head and taking a large drink before spurting the water through its baleen, filtering out a snack of freshwater krill. Molly no longer wore the garb of their mission. She had discarded the cap which bore the Mufasa logo. In its place was a delicate crown in the style of the colonists, gossamer thin with a tiny jewel that hung on the ridge of her brow. Her hair had grown since he had seen her last several weeks ago, only now he seemed to see her as she truly was, or as she was meant to be. He felt both delight at her presence and ashamed that he should look on her. He fought the urge to lower his eyes and felt a strange compunction to bow as she approached. He thought that absurd, and resisted by standing especially and awkwardly upright. He felt even more clumsy when she embraced him and kissed his cheek. He blushed, filled with embarrassment and confusion. Not that she should display affection to him, but that she would deign to do so. He became self-conscious of his dirty envirosuit, nor had he washed or bathed. He doffed his Mufasa cap in what he thought the best gesture of respect he could muster, and immediately regretted doing so. He ran his fingers through his hair in a hopeless attempt to straighten what must have been a disgraceful mop of disarray. Molly smiled, finding joy in his dis-ease. It was not a smile of condescension or abasement. It reminded him of the way a mother would look at a child, and he calmed at once. She asked how he was, and he told her everything that had happened. Their ongoing frustration at being unable to enter the city, the mission's stagnation, uncertainty at what had become of her after she left and why, their arguments with the colonists, how the storm had destroyed their camp, Jazzy. Waters did not know how long he talked, but they must have walked along the banks of the river for many hours, because the day passed through its golden hours, making way for Polus to dominate the sky above, and the luminescent display of night to take the sun's place. Molly finally spoke. "Alex, may I join you back at the camp tonight?" Waters hardly felt he could refuse her request, nor did he want to. "Of course," was all he managed. She motioned in the direction of the camp. "Right now?" Waters said, feeling foolish. "I think that now is the best time," she said. Having earlier been self-conscious about his jumper and hair and how he must smell, oh, how he must smell, his thoughts now turned to the shelter. They were not untidy, but it was no place for her to visit. "Let's have dinner under the sky tonight," she responded as if she knew. "We can set up a table and chairs, and I can ask for the colonists to bring us something to eat." "That would be fine," he said. She had put him at ease once more. June Buck and Tommy saw them approach the camp, but Bo was nowhere to be seen. The two men were sitting outside the shelter at June Buck's workbench, jabbering about whatever it is that causes friends to jabber. As Molly drew near, they stood automatically. Both removed their hats. Tommy his cover and June Buck his Mufasa cap, as if it were involuntary. Molly hugged them both, Tommy first and then June Buck, who actually did return a bow. Jazzy saw from the rover that a colonist had come to camp and climbed down to investigate. "Molly?" she said. "Hi, Jazzy. I'm so happy to see you again," Molly replied with a hug. Jazzy was dumbstruck. Together they cleared a small space of ground and surrounded it with rocks. They gathered some dry wood and built a fire. Tommy showed them how to light it, first putting together a nest with some dried grasses and small wood shavings that he made with his knife. Scraping some ground aluminum flakes into the bowl of the nest, he struck a metal rod against the spine of his knife and ignited them into a small coal with a few sparks. He blew on the coal gently, catching the grass and wood shavings on fire before placing it in the center of a neat alternating stack of small wooden sticks, which quickly caught the flame. Then they stacked larger branches along the perimeter of the flames, forming a fine campfire, and what a delight it was. Waters had never seen such a campfire. Sure, they had huddled around a small fire during the storm, but this was different. Regulations forbade open flames on Earth due to the possibility of wildfire. They normally did all their cooking with electric heat, but he could see no reason why they should not have a fire. It was not an especially cool night, but the fire offered comfort and warmth in a way that penetrated his bones, warming him from the inside, even his spirit, if he dared say so. June Buck offered his workbench as a table. A few colonists brought them a small pot. Its savory smell made their mouths water when they lifted the lid. The colonists joined them, and they sat and ate and talked. Tommy told stories from the Marines. June Buck told stories of his large family. The colonists were eager to hear about Earth and asked many questions. Waters felt he had nothing interesting to contribute and chunked twigs into the fire while he slurped his stew, but that was satisfying in itself. Molly listened and laughed. The stew itself was a mixture of vegetables grown in and around the city with grilled freshwater prawns, covered in a viti juice reduction and spices. They devoured it. Waters was afraid it would run out too soon with so many around the table, but each time they dipped the ladle into the pot, it came out full. At last they had eaten their fill and leaned back in their chairs. A satisfying and comforting silence rested over the table. That was when Molly began to speak. Molly inhaled the way a person does when about to reveal something important. The missionaries all sat forward, ready to hear what she had to say. The colonists, seeing that a more intimate moment was about to begin, excused themselves. Molly hesitated, then began. "I was never supposed to be a member of the mission. The administration sent my mom and dad upstate for training. Before that happened, my parents had enough foresight to send my brother to stay with friends. In reality, the administration wanted to reprogram them, or, if you want to call it something nicer, re-educate them. For the same reason Mufasa relocated those colonists from Alpha Centauri B, the same reason our mission came here to Polus. Waters shifted uncomfortably at the mention of Alpha Centauri B. He did not like his mission being compared to a disaster. You've probably never seen pictures of one of the facilities where they do the training either. With good reason, photography and video are strictly forbidden. They're not facilities, they're gulags. And there's no training going on, it's forced labor. My parents were sent away. I didn't go with them because I was at school, but I found out quickly what had happened. A member of the administration showed up at my apartment escorted by a couple of officer positions. She came on the pretense of an informational visit, but she was really sounding me out. That was the start of when I agreed to go on the mission. My parents were members of the Good Samaritan's board, and the administration was especially eager to make an example of them. What better way than to have their own daughter go on a colonial mission? You probably saw them on the news. I'm sure you'd recognize them. In exchange for my denunciation and participation in the mission, my parents were moved out of the gulag and into house arrest and got to bring my brother home. Well, they didn't call it house arrest, but that's what it amounts to. They are only permitted to use administration phones that track their movements. They also don't get to work anymore, so they're dependent on the administration. At least they still have a home. Before long, they'll probably end up on the streets like all opposition members. You saw me on the news. I had to read several prepared statements denouncing GS and praising the administration. That's how I got my celebrity status, by denouncing good people like my parents. But you said you're not a celebrity, Jazzy interjected. That's right. I never wanted to be one, especially not for that reason. That was about the time I developed depression. I wasn't just sad in the way anyone would be if their parents were in trouble, but I had a bona fide mental illness. Jazzy, Dr. Beebe, I want to thank you for the way you helped me through all that. Jazzy acknowledged the compliment, but looked a little uneasy. I last spoke to my parents the night I left to join the colony, the night the Li-Fi window was open. My parents told me to join the city. Even though they knew they would be sent back to supplemental education, they told me to join the colonists. Though I denounced them publicly, they understood my reasons. But they were only concerned about me. I confessed to them, and they forgave me. So I left the mission. The missionaries were not quite sure how they should react to Molly's story. It was late by the time she finished, and they said their goodbyes, leaving their questions for another time. After Molly said goodnight and returned to the city, the 4 missionaries retired to their bunks. It had been a more satisfying evening than Waters could remember in a long time, yet he could not sleep. Molly's story had left him with many thoughts. While she had spoken, everything she said seemed right. However, now that he was on his own again, doubt and skepticism loomed. He got out of bed, went to the open tent flap, and breathed in the cool night air. He went to the water purifier, which they still used although the colonists assured them the water was quite safe, and got himself a drink before returning to bed, hoping that the change in posture and activity might calm his mind. Instead, when he lay down, their conversations kept retreading his conscience. He questioned her newfound association with the colonists, how she had lied publicly about her beliefs to save her parents and join the mission, which also meant she had lied to them. How she could still believe those things despite their training and everything they knew. How could she? Restless, he found himself sitting at the table again outside the shelter, only the shelter seemed more like a house. A woman came and sat across from him, though he could not see her face for a light surrounding her. She plucked fruit from vines that grew along the wall of the house and placed them in a bowl on the table. "Look," she said, pointing to the chair between them. A tree began to sprout there and grow. Its trunk grew thick and put out branches and shoots and leaves. Birds came to rest in its branches, and animals sheltered in its shade. Tiny blossoms emerged and produced olives. He leaned forward to touch a branch, but could not reach it. Not yet.